How to set a sleeve with a square underarm. To make setting the sleeve cap easier, stitch 2 rows of ease stitching between the front armhole notch and the back armhole notch. Make the easing stitch lines at 3/8 of an inch and 1/4 of an inch from the cut edge. Leave long thread tails to make gathering easier. Pin sleeve, matching notches, and sleeve edge first. Match the edges and pin the whole length of the sleeve seam. Stitch under arm of sleeve at 1/2 inch seam allowance. Sew a stay stitch around the lower portion and corners of the underarm hole. Clip the corners to release the fabric. Sew shoulder seams right sides together. With right sides together, use the center seam of the bottom of the sleeve and the bottom of the armhole using your pin to align, making sure it's all straight and they connect perfectly, and pin. Next, using the corners of the sleeve and the bottom of the armhole, using the dots, align them, keeping the fabric smooth on the underneath side and pin to secure. Align the fabric edges and pin working back towards the center seam. We'll do the same thing for the opposite side, aligning the corners using the dots. Pin to secure, align the edges working back towards the center seam, and pin. The idea here is to create as straight an bottom edge as possible. Then we're going to start moving towards the curve of the sleeve. Align the fabric, knowing you're going around to make the corner. Align your edges and pin to secure. Be sure to match your notches. Keep pinning, matching the edges of your sleeve to the armhole, working around. At the top, match the shoulder seam to the top sleeve notch and pin. Keep moving around the armhole, pinning the sleeve to the armhole. Then at the bottom corner again, we'll start working up on the sleeve. Pull your ease stitching so that it's as even as you can make it. The sleeve is actually larger than the armhole, so we're making it smaller so that it will ease into the armhole better. Make any adjustments, taking your time. Even out your easing. Align your edges and pin to secure. Add as many pins as makes your work easier. You want a secure hold of the sleeve in the armhole. Make any adjustments you feel necessary. Just inspect your work. Add more pins if it'll help. Just have a good look at everything. Be sure it looks like it's all ready to go. You don't have any puckers or gathers where you don't intend for them to be. Everything's laying out smoothly and ready to go. Take the time to base stitch the sleeve to the armhole. Make the base stitch inside the seam allowance. This stitching will be removed eventually, so don't worry how it looks. The purpose is to hold the sleeve and armhole together securely. Base stitching saves time in case you need to rip stitches out because the pins don't hold or you need to fix and do over. Having base stitched before you take your work to the sewing machine will simply make life easier. When base stitching, be sure that the underneath side is smooth and everything lays together nicely. Continue base stitching around the armhole, paying extra attention when you reach the corners. You may want to stitch even closer to the 1/2 inch seam allowance, which the stay stitch indicates. The stay stitching will eventually be removed too, so don't hesitate to get right up on the stay stitching, taking extra care as you go around the corners. Base stitching takes a little time, but just go around the armhole, and after you get past the stay stitching, try to stay well within the 1/2 inch seam allowance as you go. Remember, you're base stitching, you're not gathering. So be sure everything lays flat and smooth it out if things start to pucker. Try to keep all of your gathering stitches out of the way. You have a lot of infrastructure at this point, but it won't always be that way. We'll remove all of that once we get to the machine. But for now, take care again going around the corners with your basting, staying as close as you can to the 1/2 inch seam allowance of the stay stitching. The corners are the crucial part. And the pins are always a little fiddly. It just takes time, but you'll be glad you did it. The base stitch is really what ensures that your sewing around the corners will go smoothly. You can give it a couple of little back stitches if you want to, just to secure the thread. Now we're ready to go. Now we finally made it to the sewing machine, so be sure, even though you've got your basting done, be sure your corners are aligned and ready to go. I've decided to start at a quarter, at an actual corner to start. It just worked better for me. But feel free to start in the center of the sleeve seam if you choose to. Always remember to put your needle down in your fabric and make all of your adjustments with the needle in the fabric before you lift your presser foot, making sure that your fabric is smooth and not caught, bunched up underneath your presser foot before you get started. Now remember, the basting stitch is just there to hold the pieces together to make it easier to sew. If you would like to keep your pins in your work, that's just fine. I've chosen not to, just because I had less to have to contend with. So as you can see, you just want to be sure everything is nice and smooth underneath the presser foot as you work. Always keep your needle in the fabric before you lift your presser foot to make the adjustments. We're working on the 1/2 inch seam allowance, and you might think, well, we've already got a red stay stitch, and we do. That stay stitch will come out when we're done, and so will the basting, and we'll just be left with our final stitch. Now as we approach the next pivot and corner, be sure that you adjust your fabric from one side of the needle to the other when you make the pivot on the corner. Once again, needles in the fabric, having to readjust. Once we get past these corners, it really is not a problem. The sleeve will go in just fine. This is the only tricky part. Be sure to keep all of your extra threads out of the way. Just makes it easier, less you have to pick out and contend with when you're done. Here we are approaching the shoulder seam and the top of the sleeve cap. We are now in the home stretch. Once again, keep those gathering or easing stitches out of the way. Smooth your fabric as you go. And here we come, approaching that final corner dot. When you get to the dot, remember to adjust the fabric from one side of the needle to the other. There we go, and I'm giving it a few hand turns just to be sure, and a couple of little back stitches, and now we are done with setting our sleeve. And here is our finished sleeve in the armhole. You can see I have it stretched over a hem, and you can see the corners. You can see that the seams are aligned for the sleeve bottom as well as the armhole. And like I said, I have it stretched over a hem so you can see the whole sleeve. I highly recommend using a muslin for this. It is really lovely to be able to practice and try your hand at things without messing up your fashion fabric. And now I'm going to show you the inside. And remember, all the basting stitches and the stay stitches and the easing stitches have been removed, so this is what you should be left with. And there's the bottom of your sleeve. I've done a little reinforcing in the corners just for some stability and strength. This is not a difficult thing to do, but a little practice is a very good thing. So I highly recommend, like I said, to make a muslin. And don't forget that you should do 2 sleeves for practice. So you will do the entire process again for the second sleeve, and hopefully you will do even a better job.